The evening air was cool, and the campus buzzed with excitement. Everyone knew tonight was special. A billionaire, one of the richest men alive, had come to the university to attend a charity dinner. It was not every day that students got to sit at the same table as someone so powerful. The hall had been decorated with shining lights, polished silverware, and flowers placed carefully on each table. The smell of expensive food filled the air, and the sound of laughter and soft music floated through the room. Among the group of students invited, there was one young black student who never thought he would be chosen. His name was Jordan. He was quiet, humble, and mostly kept to himself. He wasn't from a rich family. In fact, he worked long hours at a part-time job just to pay his fees. He often felt invisible among the other students, many of whom came from wealthy backgrounds, when his professor told him he had been selected. To attend the dinner, Jordan thought it was a mistake, but it wasn't. Somehow, his name was on the list. As he walked into the glittering hall that evening, he felt out of place. He looked around and saw students dressed in designer clothes, talking confidently, their laughter echoing across the room. Jordan wore his best shirt, but compared to the others, he felt small. Still, he took a deep breath and reminded himself that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Maybe, just maybe, something good would come out of this night. At the far end of the hall, the billionaire entered. The room immediately grew quieter. Cameras flashed as he shook hands with the professors and donors. His presence was magnetic. Everyone wanted a chance to impress him, to ask for advice, or maybe to secure a future connection. For Jordan, this was all overwhelming. He sat quietly at his assigned table, his heart racing. As the billionaire slowly made his way closer, when the billionaire finally sat at the head table, the waiters began serving the first course. The food looked fancy, like something Jordan had only seen in magazines. Plates of colorful dishes were placed in front of the guests. Students around him whispered in excitement, taking pictures of their meals before eating. Jordan, however, didn't reach for his fork. His eyes were fixed on one dish that the billionaire was about to eat. Something about it seemed familiar. He tried to push away the thought. Maybe he was imagining things, but the more he looked at the dish, the stronger the memory became. Jordan remembered something from his childhood, something his grandmother had once told him about a particular ingredient. It was rare, expensive, and dangerous if eaten by the wrong person. At first, he shook his head, telling himself he was being foolish. After all, chefs at such a grand event wouldn't make a mistake like that, would they? Jordan tried to focus on the conversations around him, but he couldn't. His hands grew sweaty, and his chest tightened. He kept glancing at the billionaire, who was smiling, talking, and lifting his fork. The billionaire looked confident, unaware that danger might be sitting right there on his plate. Jordan's heart began to pound louder, and a thought screamed inside his head. Should I say something? But fear held him back. Who would believe him? He was just an ordinary student. If he spoke up and turned out to be wrong, he would look like a fool in front of everyone. Worse, he could be thrown out, humiliated, and maybe even punished. All the other students seemed so eager to please the billionaire. While he sat there frozen, torn between doubt and a growing sense of urgency, Jordan closed his eyes for a moment and remembered his grandmother's voice. She used to say, "If you see danger coming and stay silent, you share the blame." Those words echoed in his mind now, louder than the music, louder than the laughter, louder than his fear. He opened his eyes again, and the billionaire's fork was almost at his mouth. At that moment, Jordan felt a surge of courage rise inside him. He didn't know where it came from. Maybe desperation, maybe instinct, maybe fate. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood up so fast that people turned to look at him. His heart hammered in his chest, but his voice cut through the room, louder than he ever thought he could shout. "Don't eat that. The words rang across the hall, sharp and shocking. The music stopped. Forks clinked against plates as hands froze in midair. Dozens of eyes turned toward Jordan in disbelief. Spurs broke out instantly. Who was this student, and why would he yell like that at a billionaire? The billionaire himself stopped, his fork still raised, his face stiff with surprise. He slowly turned his head and stared at Jordan, his eyes narrowing, confusion spreading across his features. The room was silent, waiting for what would happen next. Jordan's breath was shaky, but he stood his ground. Deep down, he knew he had done the right thing. He had no idea how much this moment would change his life forever. Asterisk. The hall was frozen in silence after Jordan's unexpected shout. Every head turned, every whisper stopped. For a moment, it felt like time itself had paused. The billionaire stared at him with sharp, piercing eyes, holding his fork in midair. No one dared to move. The only sound was Jordan's heart pounding. Like a drum inside his chest, Jordan could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. Some students looked shocked, some looked annoyed, and some even smirked, waiting to see him embarrass himself. Professors frowned, their expressions dark with worry. Who was this young man to interrupt such an important evening? The billionaire slowly lowered his fork, but didn't put it down. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And why?" he asked in a calm yet icy voice. "Should I not eat this?" His tone carried authority, the kind that made most people shrink. But Jordan's eyes stayed fixed on the plate. He pointed slightly, his hand trembling. "That dish. There's something in it. Something that can hurt you." The room erupted with gasps and murmurs. The head chef, who was standing near the door, immediately stiffened. One of the professors whispered harshly, "Jordan, sit down. Right now, you're making a fool of yourself." But Jordan didn't sit. He couldn't. The memory of his grandmother's warning burned in his mind. He had seen this exact garnish before, a rare herb that looked harmless but could be dangerous. In certain cases, as a child, his grandmother had once stopped him from eating food that contained it. She told him stories of people falling gravely ill because they didn't know its hidden danger. Jordan had never forgotten the fear in her voice. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Please," he said louder, his voice shaking but firm. "That food isn't safe for you. There's an ingredient in it that could. It could trigger something very dangerous." The billionaire narrowed his eyes, curiosity flickering across his face. He was a man who had faced business rivals, journalists, and critics, but never a student shouting at him in public. Instead of dismissing Jordan immediately, he set his fork down slowly, almost theatrically, making the moment stretch. "Dangerous?" he repeated. "For me?" "Yes," Jordan said, his voice steadier now. "For you?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. "Yes." Some students whispered that Jordan was trying to get attention. Others thought he might have lost his mind. A professor stood up as if to pull him away, but the billionaire raised a hand, stopping them. "Let him speak," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed locked on Jordan's. Jordan felt his knees shaking, but he took a deep breath. "That herb. It looks like decoration, but it's not safe. My grandmother knew about it. She taught me that if someone has a certain health condition, eating it could be fatal. And I read in an article once that you had that exact condition." The hall went silent again. Everyone knew the billionaire was private about his health. Very few people dared to mention it openly. And yet, here was a student exposing it in front of everyone. Some jaws dropped. The billionaire's face tightened. For a split second before he masked it again with a neutral expression, he glanced at his plate, then back at Jordan. "You think you know about my health?" His tone was sharp, but there was something else beneath. It's something like uncertainty. Jordan's stomach twisted. Had he gone too far? Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he had misread everything. But the voice inside him screamed that he was right. He clenched his fists, forcing himself not to back down. "I don't think, sir," he said softly. "I know. Please, don't eat it." The head chef stepped forward, his face pale. "Impossible," he said quickly. "Every ingredient was tested. We prepared this with utmost care." But the billionaire raised his hand again, silencing him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes never leaving Jordan's. "You're saying this could kill me," he said slowly. "And you're so certain you're willing to risk your reputation, your place here, everything, just to shout at me in front of everyone." Jordan nodded, his throat dry. "Yes." The silence in the room deepened. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Students watched as if they were in the middle of a play, waiting for the final act. Professors exchanged nervous glances, unsure what would happen next. The billionaire tapped his fingers lightly against the table. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes had softened just slightly. Then, in a sudden movement, he pushed the plate away. "Fine," he said. "Bring in the medical staff. Test it now." The head chef looked horrified, but obeyed. Within minutes, staff rushed in with equipment. The room watched in tense silence as the food was tested. Every tick of the clock felt like an hour. Jordan stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. If he was wrong, this would be the end for him. He would be humiliated, expelled, maybe even sued. Finally, the medical team looked up, their faces pale. One of them cleared his throat and spoke. "Sir, the student is right. That garnish contains a compound that could trigger a severe reaction in someone with your condition. It would have been extremely dangerous if consumed." The room gasped as if a wave had swept over them. The billionaire's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again, this time not in anger, but in thought. Slowly, he turned back toward Jordan, studying him like he was seeing him for the first time. The billionaire had just been saved from disaster. And the one who saved him wasn't a professor, a doctor, or a wealthy guest. It was a student, an ordinary black student who had dared to shout the truth when no one else would. The hall remained in stunned silence, waiting for the billionaire's next move. Asterisk, the words, "Don't eat that," still echoed in the hall, sharp and unforgettable. Even though only a few seconds had passed since Jordan shouted, it felt like the silence afterwards stretched on forever. The glittering chandeliers above seemed frozen. The music had stopped. And every guest's eyes were locked on the young student who dared to break the perfect flow of the evening. Jordan stood tall, though his heart thundered painfully inside his chest. His hands trembled slightly, but he clenched them into fists, forcing them still. He knew there was no going back now. Once the words left his mouth, the entire hall had changed. Students at the nearby tables exchanged wide-eyed looks. Some of them whispered behind their hands, their voices sharp with judgment. "What's wrong with him?" One muttered. "Has he lost his mind?" Another sneered. Some laughed nervously, while others leaned forward, curious to see how badly this would end for him. Professors at the faculty table frowned deeply. One of them half rose from his seat, gesturing angrily for Jordan to sit down. "Hey, this is unacceptable," the professor hissed. "Do you realize who you're speaking to?" But Jordan didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the billionaire. That was the only person who mattered right now, the man with the fork still hovering near his plate. His eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. The billionaire lowered the fork slowly, deliberately, placing it back on the edge of his plate, with a faint metallic clink. The sound echoed across the hushed room. Then he leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, his face calm but sharp. like a predator observing prey. "Don't eat that," he repeated in a low voice, almost mocking the words. His lips curved into something between a smirk and a frown. "Tell me, young man, do you often stand up and scream during dinners with your elders, or is this a special occasion?" Laughter rippled through the hall, nervous but eager. Many students chuckled, hoping to stay in the billionaire's good graces. Jordan felt their laughter like knives in his skin, but he didn't back down. He swallowed hard, his voice shaky but clear. "I had to warn you, sir. That food isn't safe for you." The billionaire tilted his head, amused yet curious. "Not safe," he said softly, his voice calm but cutting. "And you are what? A trained doctor? A chef? Or just a student who thinks he knows more than the people who prepared this dinner?" The audience chuckled again. Jordan's face burned red, but he lifted his chin. "I'm just a student," he admitted. "But I know what I saw, and I couldn't stay quiet." The billionaire's eyes darkened. He leaned forward now, his elbows resting on the table. "Do you realize what you've just done?" His voice was low, but the words carried like thunder. "You interrupted my meal. You embarrassed the organizers. You questioned the chefs. And worst of all, you assumed something about me in front of hundreds of people." Jordan's legs nearly buckled. His body screamed for him to sit down, to apologize, to disappear. But the thought of the herb on that plate, the dangerous truth his grandmother had taught him, burned stronger than his fear. He forced himself to stand his ground. "Yes," he said, his voice steadier now. "I know what I've done, and I'd do it again. Because if I didn't, you could be in danger." Gasps rippled through the hall. The audacity. A mere student, telling a billionaire that he might be in danger. Some students shook their heads in disbelief, certain this would be the end of Jordan's academic career. Professors covered their faces with their hands. Dreading the fallout, the billionaire leaned back again, silent for a moment. His eyes studied Jordan like a puzzle, as though weighing every word, every breath. The silence stretched painfully. Long then, finally, the billionaire's lips curved into a cold smile. "You're either very brave," he said softly, "or very stupid." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jordan's pulse pounded in his ears. Brave or stupid? He didn't know which one he was. Maybe both. But what mattered was that the billionaire hadn't eaten the food. Not yet. The head chef stepped forward, his face pale with worry. "Sir, this is ridiculous," he stammered. "It's perfectly safe. This student is making a scene." But the billionaire raised his hand, silencing him. Without a word, his eyes never left Jordan. "You say this food is dangerous to me," he said slowly. "You claim to know something no one else here noticed. Gosh, that's a bold claim for someone who looks so ordinary." Jordan's stomach tightened at the word ordinary. It was true he wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, he wasn't powerful. He was just a hard-working student with nothing but his memories and his grandmother's warning. And yet, in this moment, he was the only one standing between the billionaire and disaster. His voice cracked slightly as he answered, but he didn't look away. "Ordinary or not, I couldn't let you eat it." I had to say something. The hall was silent again, charged with tension. The billionaire's eyes flickered, and for the briefest second, something like doubt crossed his face. But it was gone. As quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of calm authority. Then, slowly, he pushed the plate away from himself. The sound of porcelain scraping against the table was deafening in the quiet hall. "Very well," he said. "We'll test it. And if you're right, then maybe you've saved me. But if you're wrong..." He let the words trail off, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Jordan nodded, his throat dry. He had no proof yet, no guarantee, but deep inside he knew the truth would come out. He only hoped it would come soon, before this moment destroyed his future forever. The atmosphere inside the hall grew heavier with every passing second. The billionaire's plates sat untouched, pushed slightly away, yet the tension around it was more dangerous than the food itself. Jordan stood tall, his heart still hammering, knowing the spotlight had now fully turned on him. At first, the billionaire didn't speak. His silence was far scarier than any words. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, fingers tapping slowly against the polished wood of the table. Each tap echoed in the silent hall, like the ticking of a clock before a storm. Then his voice finally cut through the air, low, sharp, and cold enough to send shivers through the room. "You," he said, his finger pointing directly at Jordan, "stand in my presence, in front of all these people, and accuse my staff. Accuse my hosts. Accuse me of weakness." The words were not shouted, yet they carried such weight that students near the back of the hall leaned forward, straining to hear. His tone dripped with authority, the kind that crushed people's confidence. Jordan swallowed hard, his mouth dry. His instinct screamed at him to apologize, to back down, but the thought of the herb on that plate gave him strength. He forced his shaky voice to come out. "I didn't mean disrespect, sir. I meant to protect you." The billionaire's eyebrows arched sharply, as though Jordan had told a joke. "Protect me," he repeated, his lips curling into a half-smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Do you think I need protection from a boy who can barely afford to wear a suit to dinner?" The audience gasped at the insult. Some students chuckled nervously, while others looked at Jordan with pity. Professors stared at their plates, unwilling to get involved. Jordan's face burned with shame, but he didn't look away. With respect, he said quietly, "Danger doesn't care about money. Even the richest man can be harmed if no one warns him." That simple line cut through the room. The laughter died instantly. The billionaire's cold smile faded. For the first time that evening, he looked unsettled. His eyes narrowed again, but not in amusement and irritation. He leaned forward, his hands pressed flat against the table, his presence dominating the space. "You've embarrassed me in front of my guests," he said, in a deeper tone now. "Insulted the chefs who worked for weeks to prepare this menu. Do you understand the weight of what you've done?" Jordan's knees trembled, but he steadied himself. "Yes, sir," he answered. "I understand, but I would rather be embarrassed than watch you get hurt." The billionaire slammed his hand against the table suddenly, making the glasses tremble and the plates rattle. The sound rang out like a gunshot. Several guests flinched, and the hall went dead silent again. "You dare lecture me on what's best for me?" He roared now, his calm mask broken at last. His anger was like a wave crashing over everyone in the hall. Even security guards at the door shifted nervously, unsure whether to step in. Jordan's chest tightened, fear coursing through his body like ice. But somehow he stayed on his feet. His voice shook, but the words still came. "I'm not lecturing. I'm begging you. Please believe me." The billionaire's eyes blazed with fury. He stood now, towering over the table, his presence filling the hall like a storm cloud. "You think your little outburst makes you a hero? This dish is safe, then you've made a fool out of yourself. If it's safe, then your name will be remembered here only as the boy who shouted at a billionaire." Gasps filled the room again. Students looked at Jordan with wide eyes, realizing how much he had risked. Professors shook their heads, already imagining the consequences for his future. But Jordan, though pale and trembling, lifted his chin. His voice came out steadier this time. "If I'm wrong, then I'll take the shame. But if I'm right, then tonight, I've saved a life." The words hung in the air like a spark. For a moment, even the billionaire froze, his fury clashing with the undeniable courage of the boy standing before him. The silence stretched again until finally the billionaire's lips pressed into a tight line. He sat back down slowly, his jaw clenched. His anger hadn't vanished, but his curiosity had grown stronger. He gestured sharply to the staff. "Test it." Now, the head chef rushed forward, pale with fear, and motioned for the medical team again. As they carefully inspected the plate, the audience watched with bated breath. Jordan's legs felt weak, but he refused to sit. His entire future now rested on what those tests would reveal. The billionaire leaned back once more, folding his arms across his chest. His glare never left Jordan. "If you're wrong," he said, in a cold, low voice, "you'll regret ever opening your mouth." Jordan nodded faintly, his chest rising and falling quickly. "Then let the truth decide," he whispered. The tests dragged on, each second stretching into eternity. The clinking of instruments, the hushed voices of the medical team, the tense silence of the audience, it all blended into a storm inside Jordan's head. Finally, the lead medical examiner turned, his face pale. He spoke with hesitation, his voice trembling just slightly. "Sir, the student is correct. That herb contains a compound dangerous to individuals with your condition. Eating it could have been life-threatening." The hall erupted with shock, gasps, shouts, murmurs filled the room like a wave crashing against stone. The billionaire's eyes widened ever so slightly before narrowing again. His anger had not vanished completely, but now it carried something new, the weight of realization. Slowly, he turned his gaze back to Jordan. His voice was quieter now, but still sharp. "You were right, but don't think that excuses your insolence. You embarrassed me tonight, and though you saved me, you also defied me." Jordan's heart pounded, unsure what would come next. He had spoken the truth, but would that truth protect him from the wrath of the man he just saved? The night was far from over. The air inside the grand hall was thick with tension. The medical examiner's words had just confirmed the truth. The garnish on the billionaire's plate contained a dangerous compound. If he had eaten it, the result could have been deadly. A murmur rippled through the crowd like a wave, students and professors whispering, donors shaking their heads, and chefs standing frozen in disbelief. Jordan stood there, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his palms sweaty. He had been right, yet instead of relief, what he felt was a strange heaviness, the weight of hundreds of eyes still pressed down on him, judging, questioning, waiting to see what would happen next. The billionaire sat very still, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. His fingers tapped lightly against the table, his sharp eyes focused entirely on Jordan. Then, at last, he spoke in a low voice that carried across the silent room. "So," he said slowly, "you claim. You knew this before anyone else. You shouted at me in front of my guests, and somehow, against all odds, you were correct." The hall stirred again, whispers filling the silence. The billionaire ignored them all, his eyes still locked on Jordan. "Tell me," he demanded, "how does a student, someone with no training, no wealth, no status, know something that even my chefs and doctors overlooked?" Jordan's throat tightened. This was the question he had been dreading. He hadn't wanted to mention the billionaire's private condition in public, but now he had no choice. Taking a shaky breath, he began. "When I was a child," Jordan said softly, "my grandmother taught me about that herb. She told me stories of people who got sick because of it. She said it could be deadly for anyone with a certain rare condition." He paused, his eyes dropping for a moment before rising again to meet the billionaire's. "And I remember reading once in an old interview that you live with that condition." The room gasped. The whispers turned into louder murmurs. Now, shock spreading like fire. The billionaire's health had always been a secret, whispered about, but never confirmed. For years, the public had speculated, but he had denied it, hiding it carefully from the world. And now, a ordinary student, had spoken it. Aloud in front of hundreds, the billionaire's jaw tightened. His face darkened, not with shame, but with the anger of a man whose deepest secret had just been dragged into the light. He rose from his seat again, standing tall and imposing. The guests shrank back slightly as his booming voice filled the hall. "You dare speak of my condition here," he thundered. "You, a child, reveal what I have kept hidden for decades. Do you know what it means to expose me in front of all these people?" Jordan's knees trembled, but he forced himself to stay firm. His voice was quiet but steady. "I didn't mean to expose you, sir. I only meant to save you." The billionaire's eyes blazed, yet beneath the fury, there was something else. Something Jordan noticed. Fear. For just a moment, the mask of power cracked, revealing the vulnerability of a man who knew how close he had come to disaster. The medical staff spoke up then, nervously. "It's true, sir. That garnish was dangerous. This student saved your life tonight, without his warning." The doctor trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The guests gasped again. This time, not with mockery, but with awe. Whispers turned into admiration. He saved him. The boy actually saved him. Imagine the courage it took. Jordan's face burned with embarrassment, but inside, he felt a strange calm. He had done the right thing. Done that. Now, no matter what punishment might come, the billionaire's anger simmered. But he couldn't deny the truth. Slowly, he lowered himself back into his chair, though his eyes never left Jordan. His voice was quieter now, but sharp as ever. "You had no right to speak of my weakness," he said, his tone heavy with warning. But he hesitated, just for a moment. "You were right to stop me." The hall stirred again, a mixture of shock and respect. Jordan stood frozen, unsure if the billionaire's words were praise or condemnation. The billionaire leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of both authority and vulnerability. "Yes, I have this condition. Yes, I have hidden it. Because, in my world, weakness is not allowed. If people knew, they would use it against me. And tonight, you nearly exposed me to everyone." His eyes narrowed. "But you also saved me from death." The audience listened breathlessly. Their emotions pulled between awe and fear. The billionaire was known for being ruthless, untouchable, unstoppable. And now, here was proof that even he had weaknesses, proof revealed by a boy who dared to shout the truth. Jordan's voice came out softly, almost like a whisper. "Sometimes weakness isn't shameful, sir. Sometimes it's what makes us human." The words struck the billionaire like an arrow. His face twitched ever so slightly, and for the first time all evening, his eyes softened. He looked at Jordan, not as an annoyance, not as a foolish boy, but as someone who had risked everything to speak up when no one else dared. The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Guests shifted uneasily, some nodding at Jordan's courage, others still shocked by the revelation. Professors looked on with surprise, realizing that one of their quietest students had just done what none of them ever could. The billionaire finally spoke again, his voice steady, his anger restrained. "You've revealed more than I would have liked, but perhaps you've also reminded me of something I had forgotten. That courage sometimes comes from the most unexpected places." Jordan's heart skipped. He had no idea if the billionaire meant this as a compliment or a warning. All he knew was that the truth was finally out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hall sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone. The billionaire had been moments from disaster, and the one who saved him was the last person anyone expected. Asterisk. The hall was still buzzing with whispers after the revelation. The billionaire's secret was now out in the open, his condition confirmed, and everyone was struggling to process it. Some guests glanced nervously at each other. Others shook their heads in disbelief, while a few leaned closer, whispering about how close he had come to death. Jordan stood frozen, his body tense, his heart racing. Even though the truth had been revealed, even though the medical team had confirmed the danger, he still couldn't shake the feeling of fear crawling inside him. What if they had discovered it too late? What if the billionaire had taken just one bite before he shouted? The thought made his stomach twist. The billionaire, however, looked calmer than before, though his expression was unreadable. He sat back in his chair, fingers interlocked, his sharp eyes scanning the room. For the first time that evening, he seemed less like the untouchable giant of industry and more like a man who had just brushed shoulders with death. The lead doctor stepped forward, holding the report. His voice trembled slightly. "Sir, the results are clear. This garnish contained a compound that would have caused a severe and immediate reaction. If you had eaten even a small bite, the outcome could have been fatal." A shocked gasp spread through the audience like a wave. Some guests covered their mouths, others pressed their hands to their chests. Professors exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. A few students whispered, "He really saved him. The boy actually saved him." The billionaire's face darkened, not with anger this time, but with realization. His jaw tightened as he slowly exhaled. He looked down at the untouched plate. In front of him, then back at the medical team. "You're saying I was seconds away?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Yes, sir," the doctor replied. Seconds. The billionaire's hands clenched into fists, the reality sinking in. He had stared death in the face without even knowing it. And the only reason he was still alive was because of a student who dared to yell at him when no one else would. The silence in the hall was heavy, broken only by the nervous shifting of chairs. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. He had known it was dangerous, but hearing the words "fatal" and "seconds away" made his knees weak. He almost collapsed back into his seat, but forced himself to stay standing. The billionaire finally raised his head, his gaze falling back on Jordan. For a moment, the two locked eyes, one filled with fear, but courage, the other filled with pride, but now cracked with vulnerability. "You," the billionaire said slowly, his voice rougher than before, "stopped me from making the last mistake of my life." Gasps echoed again. Students leaned forward, stunned at the billionaire's admission. He had never thanked anyone publicly, never admitted weakness, never spoken so plainly about danger. But before Jordan could reply, the billionaire's face hardened again. He turned toward the chefs standing by the wall. His voice roared across the hall like thunder. "Who allowed this dish to reach my plate?" The chefs flinched. The head chef stepped forward, bowing his head in shame. "Sir, I take full responsibility. It was meant to be safe. We overlooked the garnish. We never imagined it could never imagined." The billionaire snapped, his voice sharp with fury. "Your lack of imagination almost cost me my life," the chef stuttered, unable to speak. Guests avoided eye contact, their faces pale. The atmosphere was suffocating, the tension unbearable. Jordan wanted to stay silent, but something inside pushed him forward again. "Sir," he said carefully, his voice soft, "they didn't mean harm. Mistakes happen. The important thing is, it was caught in time." The billionaire turned sharply, his eyes narrowing on Jordan again. "You defend them now." His tone carried both irritation and disbelief. Jordan's throat tightened, but he nodded. Yes, Because if we focus on anger, we forget the lesson. What matters most is that you're safe. The billionaire stared at him for a long moment, his lips pressed into a hard line. The anger in his eyes softened just slightly, replaced by something deeper, something like reflection. Guests watched with bated breath. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A billionaire, known for his coldness and power, standing at the edge of death and being spoken to with honesty by a student who had nothing to lose. Finally, the billionaire exhaled, his shoulders lowering, he sat back down heavily, as though the weight of what had just happened was finally settling on him. He rubbed his forehead with his hand, his voice quieter now. "A close call," he muttered. "Closer than anyone will ever know." The hall was silent. Everyone understood the gravity of his words. The richest man in the room had been powerless against something as simple as food. And his survival had come down to the courage of one young man who refused to stay silent. The billionaire looked at Jordan again, his eyes different, now less cold, less sharp, and filled with something unspoken. "You saved me," he said simply, "and I do not forget debts." The guests stirred once more, shocked at the admission. Jordan's chest tightened, relief mixing with fear. He had done what he needed to do. He had stopped the billionaire from eating that dish, but what came next, he didn't know. Would he be rewarded, punished, remembered, forgotten? For now, all that mattered was this: the billionaire had been seconds from death. And Jordan, an ordinary student, had changed fate with 3 simple words. "Don't eat that asterisk." The grand hall remained unusually quiet after the shocking revelation. The billionaire sat in silence, his untouched plate pushed far away, his fingers interlocked, his eyes lowered. The man who had always seemed larger than life, untouchable and invincible, now appeared human, vulnerable in a way none of his guests had ever witnessed before. Jordan stood stiffly, unsure of what to do. His heart was still pounding from the tension of the moment. He wanted to sit down, to disappear into the background, but he couldn't move. The weight of everything that had just happened kept him frozen. He had shouted at one of the most powerful men in the world, nearly lost his future, and yet he had also saved a life. Guests whispered softly to each other. Some looked at Jordan with admiration, others with disbelief, and a few with envy. Professors glanced at him, still stunned, their expressions unreadable. Even the chefs stood like statues, their heads bowed, afraid of what might come next. At last, the billionaire raised his head. His sharp gaze swept across the room before settling once more on Jordan. But this time, something had changed. The cold fire of anger was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud or furious. It was calm, heavy with meaning. "Stand closer," he commanded. Jordan hesitated, his legs stiff, but slowly he stepped forward until he was just a few feet away from the billionaire. The room held its breath. The billionaire looked him up and down, studying the young man who had dared to break the silence, who had dared to challenge him. "Tell me your name," he said. Jordan's throat felt dry. "Jordan, sir. Jordan Williams. Jordan." "Williams," the billionaire repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. He leaned back slightly, his gaze thoughtful. "You risked everything tonight, your reputation, your future, even your dignity to save me. Why?" Jordan blinked, taken aback by the question. He hadn't thought of it that way. He swallowed and answered honestly. "Because it was the right thing to do. I couldn't stay quiet while you were in danger." The billionaire's expression softened for the first time. He let out a long breath, almost like a sigh. "Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many people around me, advisors, business partners, even so-called friends, would stay silent rather than risk their own comfort? Do you know how many would let me walk into danger just to protect themselves? Jordan shook, his head slightly unsure how to respond. The billionaire leaned forward, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. I've built empires. I've crushed rivals. I've walked into rooms where every smile was fake, where every handshake carried a hidden knife. I've lived surrounded by people who care more for my money than for my life. And yet, tonight, the one person who truly protected me was a student boy with nothing to gain. The audience stirred, their whispers now filled with awe. Jordan's cheeks flushed. He wasn't used to such attention. I wasn't trying to gain anything, sir, he said softly. I just didn't want to regret staying silent. The billionaire nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on him. Regret, he murmured. Yes, that is the one currency even I cannot afford. He paused, his gaze drifting across the hall, his voice turning heavier, almost confessional. All my life, I've feared weakness. I hid my condition because I thought it made me less. I believed if the world saw it, they would see me as fragile, as unfit to lead. So I buried it. I built walls. I trusted no one. His jaw tightened. And yet, in hiding it, I nearly died tonight. A secret almost killed me. The guests were silent, hanging on his every word. No one had ever heard the billionaire speak like this before, not in interviews, not in speeches, not even in whispers. This was not the voice of a titan of industry, but of a man reflecting on the thin line between power and mortality. Finally, he looked back at Jordan, his eyes softer than ever. But you, he said, you reminded me that honesty and courage are worth more than money or power. You shouted when no one else dared. You told me the truth, even when it could have destroyed you. Jordan felt his chest tighten. He had expected anger, punishment, maybe even humiliation. But gratitude, respect, that he had never imagined. The billionaire's voice rose just slightly, enough for the whole hall to hear clearly. For that, Jordan Williams, I owe you something. Greater than anger, I owe you my life. Gasps filled the room. The guests erupted into murmurs, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding in agreement. Professors looked stunned, unable to hide their astonishment. Students stared wide-eyed, realizing this moment would be remembered for years. Jordan's knees nearly gave out, but he steadied himself. His voice was quiet, trembling. You don't owe me anything, sir. I only did what anyone should have done. The billionaire's lips curved into the faintest smile, though it was tinged with sadness. You are wrong, Jordan. Not anyone would have done it. That is what makes your action extraordinary. The silence that followed was profound. Even the chandeliers above seemed to glow softer, as if the entire hall was bowing to the weight of the moment. For the first time in his life, the billionaire reflected not on his wealth, his power, or his empire, but on the fragility of his existence. He thought about how close he had come to losing it all, and how the one voice that saved him came from someone society might overlook. He turned slightly, addressing the hall. Let this be remembered, he declared, that tonight, a student saved a billionaire. Not with money, not with power, but with courage. Remember it well. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then louder, building into a wave that filled the hall. Some clapped out of respect, others out of relief, and a few because they truly felt moved. Jordan stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed, his ears ringing, his heart racing. The billionaire leaned closer to him once more, his voice quiet, meant only for Jordan. You've given me something I haven't felt in years. Gratitude. And that, young man, is priceless. Jordan's eyes stung with emotion. He gave a small nod, unsure what to say. For the first time that night, He allowed himself to breathe freely. The evening had begun with fear, with anger, with humiliation. But now, as the applause thundered around him, it ended with something else entirely. Respect, reflection, and gratitude. And for Jordan, that was more valuable than anything money could buy. Asterisk, the hall was still echoing with applause when the billionaire finally raised his hand, signaling for silence. The clapping slowed, then stopped, though the energy of the moment remained alive in the air. Everyone leaned forward, eager to hear what the powerful man would say next. Jordan shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many eyes. He wished the floor could swallow him up. He had only wanted to stop a disaster. But now he stood in the center of a storm he never expected. The billionaire's gaze remained fixed on him. His expression was calm now, but his eyes glowed with something Jordan had never seen before: sincerity. The man who once seemed untouchable, who had roared with fury only moments ago, now looked at Jordan as if he were the most important person in the room. Jordan Williams, the billionaire said slowly, letting the name linger in the hall. Tonight you taught me a lesson no amount of wealth or power ever could. You risked everything for the truth. You stood when others stayed silent. And you saved me from a mistake that would have ended my life. The audience listened in stunned silence, their eyes darting between Jordan and the billionaire. The billionaire straightened in his chair, his voice rising with authority. I do not let debts go unpaid. And tonight, I owe you more than anyone has ever owed me. Jordan's breath caught in his chest. He didn't understand. He didn't want anything. He had only done what he thought was right. But the billionaire wasn't finished. You will not walk out of this hall as just a student, the billionaire declared. From this day forward, you will have my support. Whatever dreams you carry, whatever path you choose, I will stand behind you. Gasps filled the hall. Some students leaned forward in disbelief. Others whispered excitedly, and a few looked jealous, their faces tightening with envy. Professors glanced at each other, realizing that one of their quietest students had just been handed a future most could only dream of. The billionaire continued, his voice strong. I will cover your education in full. No more struggling, no more debts. You will finish your studies without worry. And when you are ready to step into the world beyond these walls, I'll open doors for you, doors you could never open alone. Jordan's eyes widened, his lips parted, but no words came out. He had never imagined such a thing. All his life he had fought to stay afloat, juggling classes and part-time jobs, surviving on scraps of time and energy. And now, in one night, the future he had prayed for but never dared to expect was suddenly being placed in his hands. The billionaire wasn't finished. But more than money or opportunity, he said, his tone softening, I will give you my guidance. You saved my life tonight, Jordan. The least I can do is help you build yours. The hall erupted into whispers again, buzzing with shock and amazement. Some clapped softly, others simply sat stunned. Jordan's heart pounded as he tried to process everything. His voice came out shaky. Sir, I don't know what to say. I never wanted anything in return. The billionaire raised a hand, silencing him. And that, he said firmly, is why you deserve it. Because you did not act for gain. You acted out of courage. That is rare. That is priceless. Jordan's throat tightened, his eyes stinging with emotion. He felt as though the world around him had shifted, as though fate itself had taken him by the shoulders and turned him onto a new path. The billionaire turned to the crowd now, addressing everyone. Let this moment be remembered, he said, that even the smallest voice can hold the greatest power. That courage can come from anywhere, from anyone. And that sometimes it is the ordinary who remind us of what it means to be extraordinary. The applause that followed shook the walls. It was louder, stronger, more heartfelt than before. Guests stood to their feet, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Even professors who had doubted Jordan earlier now looked at him. With pride, Jordan, overwhelmed, bowed his head slightly, unable to hold back a small, nervous smile. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like the same quiet boy he had always been. But tonight, everything had changed. The billionaire leaned closer to him one last time, speaking in a low voice that only Jordan could hear. "You saved me, Jordan. Never forget, your voice has power. Use it. Build something with it. And when the world tries to silence you, remember this night." Jordan nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. The billionaire sat back, satisfied. The dinner resumed, though no one spoke of anything else. The story of what had just happened spread across the room like wildfire, destined to travel far beyond the walls of the university. By the next morning, the world would know, and Jordan Williams, the quiet student who once felt invisible, would no longer be just another face in the crowd. He would be remembered as the boy who shouted when no one else dared, who saved a billionaire with nothing but courage and whose life changed forever because of it. That night, as the lights dimmed and the guests slowly departed, Jordan walked out into the cool night air, his heart lighter than it had ever been. For the first time in his life, he believed in the power of his own voice, and he knew this was only the beginning.